Hey everyone, Alex Tanner here, talking shop with Outlier Firefighters. We're episode 39 with Nick Ledin. Thank you, Nick, for coming on. Really excited to have you here.
I appreciate it, Alex, man. Excited to be here. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, we're going to wrap, and it's going to be a lot of good stuff, so I hope you guys are in. We were green rooming already for 5 minutes, so sorry that we're late, but it is what it is. And we're going to probably talk about the same stuff again, I think, because that's kind of the point. But uh, Nick is a captain in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, just north of the Cheddar Curtain from me, so we're not that far. I can actually probably spit and hit Wisconsin from my house, but it's real cool to be pretty local to you in a way, I guess, compared to some other people that I have that aren't in Illinois that I usually talk to. So, again, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Midwest is best.
Yeah, right? We're going to get shirts made that say that now. So, we'll just get right into it. So, context, where you come from. So, what was your first exposure to the fire service?
Um, so if we rewind the clock, God, probably 18 years. We were out in Colorado. So I grew up in Minneapolis, went to school, undergraduate in Iowa at Iowa State, then followed my then girlfriend, now wife, out to where she did graduate school out in Colorado. So we kind of bum around and skied a buttload for a couple of years, and then she got a full-time job, and we were about that age where we had to start adulting a little bit more. And I had tried after undergrad to get into medical school, and that didn't end up happening. And so I thought, well, I don't know, maybe we'll try to be a medic. I'd been an EMT here and there, and had kind of dabbled in that over the past couple of years. And so when we moved down to Colorado Springs, I enrolled in paramedic school. So I went through that program, and it was just single role paramedic is all I was interested in at the time. And so you do your whatever it was, 12 months of school, and then we had to do 500 hours of ride time on some ambulances around there. And they split those up into 125-hour blocks, and for two of those, so half the ride time total, I rode with the fire department. So that was actually kind of the first time that I had been exposed to a fire department. And then fast forward just a couple months, and I was working as an EMT and almost becoming a medic. I was finishing up some of my testing and stuff like that. And my department, who at the time was called the UPass Regional Ambulance District, or Northeast Teller County EMS, we we were up in Woodland Park, Colorado, and anywho, they were redoing our main station, and so we got to go live with the firefighters for, I don't know, a month or two or three, however long it was for them to remodel our base. And hanging around with the firefighters there, they were working out every day. They were laughing, joking, having a good time. There was more people around the station. They were training. They got to do some pretty cool stuff. They got paid more than we did, and I thought, well, maybe this is the route to go. And so, as soon as I became a paramedic, I started volunteering as a firefighter and went through Fire One and Fire Two, and kind of fell backwards into that. The last 125 hours that I did was at Fountain Fire Department, just on the south side of Colorado Springs. And so, kind of fell in love with some of the guys I was working with, Skeldum and Rhino and Willis Dean and Nate Lynn and Rabitsky and a handful of other guys. And uh, rolled right into their academy after that, and totally lucked out. When I was done with my academy, they needed to hire a paramedic, and they only had a couple that were volunteers at the time, and they liked to hire in-house. So I kind of lucked out, and right place, right time back in 2007, and got hired by Fountain Fire Department.
Isn't it funny how that timing works out? It it,
Yeah, I
it just
totally fell backwards into this.
yeah. I was in medic school, and the department I was working for that was part time and paid on call took over ambulance service, and I had like 2 or 3 months left, I think, of medic school. They picked me up as an EMT on the contract, 2448. Just
Okay.
happened, and then because they were like, well, you're going to graduate in a couple months, so then you can just roll right into paramedic. And it was kind of cool how it worked out, and I ended up getting a sweet gig out of it. Also, my brother went to Iowa State, so that's kind of a funny connection there. He was a Cyclone
Nice.
too.
Go Cyclones, baby.
He's a civil engineer though. He's not a fireman. So
He's smarter than us, maybe.
he's pretty damn smart. I will say that. I'm the knuckle dragger out of the three Tanner boys, so it works out that way. So From there, how do you end up in Wisconsin?
So, yeah, so I got hired for full time in 2007 and 2011. A day uh, tomorrow will be so 13 years because he turns 13. We had our first kid, and so mom and dad were both our moms and dads, and one of my brothers and her brother, her only brother, and their families were all in the Midwest. They're all in Minnesota, and so God, Grayson must have been about a year, a little over a year, and Courtney said, "Hey, I think we should move back home." We had this discussion and figured it would be harder for me to get hired back home as a firefighter than it would as for my wife, who's an art teacher. So we put in and I applied a handful of places in Minnesota and in Wisconsin. Where I grew up in Minnesota, the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, Wisconsin's not too far away. You drive 35 minutes in one direction, you're in Wisconsin. Um, and ended up getting hired with Eau Claire, which is a place I'd never been to before my interviews and stuff, but only, I don't know, hour and a half from where I grew up and close to our families, close to a bunch of our friends that we had grown up with. And so we just kind of hopped on it. So a little over 11 years ago, July of 13, we moved to Wisconsin and haven't looked back. We've been super happy here.
That's awesome. So, are they single role? Are you both? How does that work?
Both. It depends on where you're at in your career here, but we do both. We transport, and for the first, I don't know, 8 years of my career here, I would spend 2/3 of the days typically on an ambulance. So plenty of time on an ambulance. Most of us are paramedics at our department, um, but we do a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah,
Like
well,
most suburban or many suburban fire departments.
pretty much. And then captain. So for us, captain is shift commander. What's captain for you guys?
Yeah, so captain's kind of station commander for us. So we got a little over 100 line firefighters or total personnel here. We got our admin chief, so we got four of those. We got a couple administrative assistants. We got our inspection division. Then we got three battalion chiefs, so they'll take over the actual shift, A, B, and C shift. And then each station has a captain, and then each station has two lieutenants on the other two shifts. So I've been a captain here for right about a year now.
Oh, that's great. Cool. And how you enjoying that role now? I mean, we're going to talk about leadership transitions and that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. But feel like maybe a year in, you're kind of starting to hit your stride, or was the transition pretty easy for you? Maybe not easy is
Yeah,
the
there's,
right
I mean,
word, but
yeah, it depends on the day. I feel like I've been super lucky and super fortunate. I'm going to say this because I don't think they're ever going to hear this, but my battalion chief is amazing, as are the other two battalions as well. But the guys that I've had to work with for the past year, really ever since I became a company officer, I've lucked out. I'm working with some of the best that we have in our department, and we all get along, and we all like to train. So we're pretty fortunate, and I've been super fortunate that I've kind of lucked out. I'm at kind of a slower house, but my driver right now, who just is out on paternity leave, used to be my lieutenant, and he used to live two doors down from me. So good buddy. And then our backstep right now has only been on here for about 2 years, but he's super squared away, incredibly fit, eating up with the job. And then the other shifts at my station are pretty awesome as well. So I lucked out, man.
yeah, yeah, don't get much better than that.
No,
That's
so far so
great.
good.
Yeah.
At some point, I'm sure the other shoe will drop, but so
Well,
far it's been relatively smooth. Knock on wood.
sometimes, man, it serves you up a challenge just to see what you got. You know what I mean? That's just kind of the way things go. But I mean, living it while you got it, right?
Yeah,
I would always give people the advice: if you could be with a good crew, it doesn't matter where you're at, right? So you do what you can to try to stick with those people that you connect with.
yeah, and I met some people might see this as kind of disadvantageous. I see this as if I can't control it, why worry about it? But I would be like the most junior captain, and we pick our stations based on seniority. So I never have a pick of where I work, and I'm like, well, if I can't have any effect over it, like why get upset about it? So I'm at a slow house, but I got a truck. Um, I'm at a slow house, so we get to work out more. I'm at a slow house, so we get to train a little bit more. I'm at a slow house, so I can prepare for when I have to act as a battalion chief. So I try to see the positives in some of the negatives. we're gonna make some lemonades out of these lemons.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's an awesome attitude to have for sure. Uh, Early in your career, and it doesn't have to necessarily be Eau Claire, but like, was there somebody specifically that you connected with early that influenced you, and still to this day, those effects have lingered?
Yeah, 100%. I was super fortunate. I don't think I'm unique in this aspect in that when I had been working as an EMT off and on for a couple years. I felt comfortable on an ambulance. I'd gone through paramedic school, and the first crew that I worked with was the crew that I had done my 125 hours of ride time with as well. So it was Ryan Torres and Mike Skeldum and Nate Lynn and Jim Rubitsky and Willis Dean, and that's who I got hired, and I was now working with those guys. So it worked out super well. And my officer at the time was Ryan Torres, or Rhino, as everyone called him. And we became really good friends. And he's the one that really kind of got me interested in the job. It became kind of this competition. He was reading, he was watching, he was going to conferences, he was even doing some writing. He wrote a little bit, one really good piece for Fire Service Warrior back in the day. That's still something that I think about a lot. But I was working with him, and so I would try to read a little bit more than him and watch a little bit more than him and go to an extra class that he did. Like I was always just trying to outdo him. So there's kind of this friendly competitive rivalry about like who could study more, who could work out harder, who could get better faster is kind of what we were trying to do. So we both kind of pushed each other, but he was already up here and I was uncomfortable on I kind of started saying this. I was really comfortable on an ambulance, or relatively comfortable. And I remember like 2 months in, they're like, "Okay, you're gonna ride the truck for this swing," and I was like, "Oh shit, what do I do?" And that's kind of where I leaned on Rhino at the beginning, and then uh, for whatever reason, I kind of fell in love with it, and then we had this rivalry where we kind of pushed each other, and over the next handful of years, we just tried to read more than the other person, or train more, or sweat more, or bleed more, or whatever we had to do.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly why I asked the question. I feel like those people early in that career, if you get latched on to the right person, and it might take you a couple people to find that right person, but it changes the trajectory of your entire career in a certain extent,
100,
right?
100%,
Yeah.
right? And I would be doing a disservice if I didn't say a couple other names in there. While Rhino was kind of the tip of the spear for me, there was Chris Frediani, there was Aaron Podzerbinski, there was Jay Larson, there was quite a few other people within that department as well, and Skeldom, like I had mentioned earlier. But Rhino was kind of the main drive for me. We for whatever reason we became really good friends. We listened to the same music, we laughed at the same jokes, and I wanted to be better than him. So that was a lot of my motivation, was to beat him.
That's awesome,
And
dude.
and honestly, it still kind of is. I get a chance to talk with him every once in a while, not as much as we'd like, but we still talk every once in a while, and yeah, we still have kind of that same little rivalry. But all right, well, I'm gonna. Did you hear this? Did you read that? Did you see this? Have you gone to that class? Do you know who this guy is yet? So
Oh, it's great. That healthy competition, it's invaluable for sure, right? Especially young in a career too. But that's cool that he was already established and he still had that. Like that's not always the case. Some people lose that. So always
yeah,
awesome to hear about.
yeah, he's still got it, man. He's a battalion chief out there right now. He's been an interim chief, chief of the department for a while. The guy's just an absolute killer. And yeah, to your point, like it's funny how a class, a chance encounter, a friendship, whatever it is, like every once in a while, if the trajectory of my career is more or less at some relatively steady slope, every once in a while, meeting some person or going and sitting in on one class, like it jumps you up like to the next plateau all of a sudden, and you kind of have these kind of punctuated, you have these periods of punctuated equilibrium where now all of a sudden you're really evolving over a short period of time. And Rhino was one of them. I've talked about this somewhere else, and I've told at least Lynch on this, but the first time I went to an irons and ladders class, realized that these guys lived and worked, 5 miles away from me, and they were way up here. And I thought, well, shit, I guess you don't have to be from FDNY or Chicago or Houston to be an absolute just killer. And so then seeing guys that, I would potentially run calls with doing some of this stuff at such a high level was super motivating to me as well.
Yeah,
So yeah, every once in a while you just have this you get this punctuated equilibrium while all of a sudden you're just making these relatively large steps and moving the ball downfield all of a sudden.
yeah, totally well spoken, and a great way of phrasing it. You don't realize until maybe you look back and then you see those moments, right? And you realize it was a defining thing of your career. You have no idea in the moment that it might become that, but the people you meet, the call you might go on that might open your eyes, the class you might take, just those little things, like you won't recognize it until, it could be years, it could be weeks, but we're always evolving, or you should try to always be evolving, in some way, right? So one of the things, I didn't know this, and I've been kind of on a pursuit of it myself, and trying to gather information about it. And I saw you at Firemanship speaking with the guys with grabs and up in the stage with McWilliams, talking about rescue survey and all those other things, right? And what I noticed about all of you guys was all of you did it and started these things roughly only 5 years or under into your career, essentially. And that really, like, I wouldn't say it like surprised me, because the more I talk to people, the more I'm realizing that early in their career you can make those big impacts, and it takes time. Obviously, like, you're 10 years, I think, into rescue survey. Really, I thought that's the number that I had heard.
Yeah, 2016, so a little over 8.
Right? I mean, that's like a long time to get to where you're at. But and please, obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I remember you had said that you were only 3 years in, essentially, when you were starting to hunt down some of this information. And I might be wrong on the number, but I remember it was early. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit, about finding something and just going all in on it?
Yeah, so I've always, I'm a science nerd. I like numbers, and for whatever reason, UL, talking about being at the right place at the right time, and just being around at the right time. Like UL, I went to a class in Colorado Springs that John Sorello, who I think was a lieutenant at the time, this would have been back in like 11, 10, something like that. So at this point in time, I had 3 or 4 years on, and I went to the horizontal ventilation class that he put on, and it really kind of like changed my perspective and brought science into firefighting, which wasn't really there for me at that point in time, or up until then. And so that kind of started me. That was kind of the first of a handful of seeds that I was now following, or breadcrumbs that I was now following. And then in 2014, I think, is when I had first sent some emails to NIFers to try to get some changes in their schema, in the questions that they had asked, and maybe the answers that they were trying to find as well. So that would probably about 7 years into my career. But really, in all honesty, it took me probably the first year of my career. I really didn't do anything besides collect a paycheck and go on the calls I was on. And I wasn't super into the job until like a year onto the job. So anywho, probably 7 years into it is when I first started asking some of these questions. And then 2016 would have been about 9 years on the job for me.
And that's total, right? Not just necessarily Eau Claire, right? Because maybe that's where I was getting the number confused.
So I came into Eau Claire. I had been there since 2013.
Okay.
So 2014, we started sending some emails to some people, and kind of the very, very beginning of my portion of FRS kind of was born. But 2016 is really when we started Firefighter Rescue Survey. And really when we'd had our first meeting as well, because it all happened super fast. Between the first time that I had contacted Brian Olson and the first time that people were inputting surveys, it was a matter of like 4 weeks.
I mean, yeah, wow. So you and Brian were both firefighters then, right? Doing that, right? Neither of you had a position of leadership or anything like that, right? So even if the number and the time period
Yeah.
isn't what I was understanding from, but it still stuck out to me. You know, it was two
Yeah.
firefighters that had
No one had ever
questions,
heard of us.
right?
People had heard of Brian Olson. People had not
Yeah,
heard of Nick Ledin. People had not heard of Justin McWilliams at this point in time either. People had not heard of Shane Thomas or
yeah,
Trent Morrison. So yeah, we were no ones, and we were from kind of these places that no one had ever heard of. No one had heard of Clackamas or Eagle or Eau Claire.
yeah,
So yeah, we were a bunch of kind of, as much as people sometimes hate this, we were kind of some no ones from nowheres, and just this, it was such a good idea, and I didn't come up with it. I won't claim to have come up with it, but that it just had legs, and it was the fact that the fire service, if our, to paraphrase Brian Brush here, Chief Brush, the mission must match the metrics is what he says. And if our mission is saving lives, like, wait, why aren't we trying to get data on how many lives we save, where we're saving lives, how we're saving lives, whose lives are we saving, what is working, what is not working for us.
yeah.
So surprising that we weren't that we had to come up with this, in all honesty. Like, I'm surprised that this wasn't figured out well before us.
Well, I think like for a lot of that stuff, when it comes to data and research, like I think either people just didn't like there was research and data that existed. It's not like there. I mean, we get the Book of Andy. Like it's not like there wasn't research being done. I just don't think it was to the scale of like what you would see, UL's studies and all that stuff that they have going on. Like to that volume, it didn't exist. That long ago, right? And so people were just doing the job, and it was all experience based to a certain extent, right? And now, like come to around now is we back up that experience with actual data that proves it to a certain extent, right? So some of these theories actually are based in something. So, I mean, like you're getting at, finding that data, having a reason and a rationale behind what we do, like seeking that, seek to understand, right? Like if you just take stuff at face value, it doesn't have as much merit to a certain extent, right? So
yeah, there's that phrase too, like the plural of anecdote is anecdotes, right? Like that's still not actual data necessarily. So how do we bind things? How do we, because of FSRI and actually doing, more or less scientific experiments on these, and getting close to the scientific method for a lot of the stuff that they're doing, that has changed the fire service. It's changed how I think people look at the fire service. And while we did have data points before, like you mentioned the Book of Andy, it really didn't have quite the teeth and the depth and the breadth to it that we have nowadays, which is super nice. We're fortunate enough that we get to stand on the shoulders of giants. And now a lot of the stuff that Andy was saying, has now been validated, and he's been vindicated, right? Where there was quite a bit of pushback at the time.
yeah, it makes
at least pockets of pushback.
Yeah, it almost becomes undeniable, right? At a certain point, now it's not opinion anymore. It's you back up someone who has a vast amount of experience, and it proves what they've seen over time, or could disprove. I mean, there were things that I'm sure those studies have disproved, but yeah, for the most part, like you're starting to see it backed up now, and changing the way we do things. And I think what Rescue Survey tandemed with that UL study that they did on search not too long ago, just both those together are incredible documents for really being able to, as a trainer, tell people this is why we should do it this way. Well, you shouldn't pick somebody up under their shoulders and drag them, because if you're above 3 feet, you're more likely to kill them. Even if you're going 3 times faster. So all those little things have data points now that, it's not just some guy going, yeah, you shouldn't do that. Well, here's the why, and what you guys put together, I mean, obviously it's grown exponentially. So Preston Lyons is in the chat, and he got a question here, and it's, where do you see the survey going in 5 years?
That's a good question, Preston. The actual survey itself, I think we'll slowly refine. This is a living document. We're rolling up on 4,000 rescues, so we'll have to analyze the 4,000 data here coming up. But one nice thing that we do every time our goal at least is every time we reanalyze the data, we really want to take a nice hard look at the survey, look at each single question, and be like, is this question bearing fruit? Does this give us actionable, usable data? Is this need to know type stuff? Or is this kind of just nice to know type stuff? So we really just want to streamline this. If we had our way, we would probably be asking closer to 100 questions as opposed to the 50-ish. But hopefully, I don't know how much more the actual survey itself is going to change. I'd like to think that when NARIS opens up, there's going to be a lot of data sets that we can kind of overlay on top of each other to try to hopefully validate some of our data. We have some issues with our data in the fact that it is voluntary, that maybe we have some type of survivor bias where people that make a rescue where somebody lives, they're more likely to fill out a survey versus somebody who makes a rescue where they end up, passing. So if we can get closer to all of the data or a larger sample size, hopefully we can figure out how many rescues we're actually making, even though Brush did a really good job at taking a stab at that. But hopefully figure it out because we can overlay some of this, we can also take some of their data, hopefully, and figure out what are these department sizes. We don't ask questions on department size. We don't ask questions on department type, meaning volunteer, paid on call, career. So all questions that we've thought about. We don't ask questions if it's a truck that made the rescue versus an engine. So there's a lot of questions that we've considered and will reconsider moving forward. But hopefully we'll get some type of ability to overlay some data from NARIS and figure out do we have any holes, and we can hopefully shore up any holes or weaknesses that we have, and then hopefully work in tandem with them to figure out where can we find better information, and how do we evolve from here. What's really nice about us being kind of organic and grassroots is we can change direction relatively quickly. If tomorrow we wanted to throw out one of our questions, that's super easy for us to do. And so with that being said, to everyone listening, if you have questions that we should be asking, or you're interested in, or it's super important that we should be asking and we're not, just reach out to any one of us. We have this long running list of questions that we go through every year and a half or 2 years once we reanalyze the data. And so we're human, we make mistakes. And we haven't thought about every question out there, obviously, and maybe we're asking questions less than ideally. So if you have maybe a better wording for a question that we have, we're all ears for that as well. I don't know how much more it's going to change. I'd like to think that we're going to grow in a little bit of our scope. We have partnered with FSRI, and I don't know what I can or can't say about what may or may not be happening, but we're kind of excited about what might be happening with them. I do think I can share that they're going to be helping with some of our analysis and kind of behind the scenes, what's the right word, building of our framework. And I think our data sets might be able to be kind of mirrored with NARIS data sets, since they are running, I don't know if running is quite the right word. They're making the architecture for NARIS. It's USFA and FSRI working together. So Craig and Dr. Moore Merrill and everybody else that's involved in that process. But hopefully we can have very similar data sets, and maybe potentially one day down the road start talking to each other. I would love to get information downstream on our victims, and somehow bring in burn physicians and emergency room physicians or NEMSIS or something, but we don't quite know how we're going to eat that elephant yet.
Yeah, I mean, well, all that stuff is a great step into basically taking those few minutes that we have on the street to really make an impact and maximizing it, right? And I think that's what it's all about. That's what every bit of data that you pull, every question you ask, it all filters right back to that moment of maybe, under 6 minutes, just showing up, going to work, and trying to make an impact on someone's life, and to have clear cut, well, maybe not clear cut, but at least quantifiable information to make your decision. Like that way you don't do the wrong. I shouldn't say the wrong thing, but you pick the best possible tactics to get that person out. So I would love a question for you with it is, as it's grown and you've talked to people, I'm sure you've talked to plenty of firemen now about search and how it's conducted and rescues and things. Have there been like some questions that have come up about methodology of how we do things that have influenced how you've put questions into the survey? Meaning like regional tactics of how people do stuff, or how a department writes their search SOGs, or whatever, a theory that someone has. What are some things that you've, over the course of it changing, have you put in there to try to help quantify things?
Yeah, some of these, some of the ones that popped into my head, and I think this is maybe what you're looking for, and if not, just correct me. But I remember one of the questions that we asked relatively early on was, did you shelter the victim in place for, we have currently listed as over 2 minutes. And I remember there was quite a bit of discussion about that, because kind of the prevailing wisdom of the time was, shit and get, you see somebody, you pull them out the way you came in. And many people were teaching and preaching that don't isolate them in a room and don't open the window because it's going to take you longer to get them out. Just bring them back the way you came, and you can get them out there in 35 seconds as opposed to 2 minutes. Well, now we know that proximity to the fire, the communication or isolation, whether or not you're behind a closed door, even whether or not they're breathing, which is something that we're not going to be able to assess well on most of our victims. That was one of the questions that I remember there was a lot of kind of internal discussion within FRS to figure out, should we ask this? How do we ask this? What's the best way to ask this? And there's probably a better way that we could be asking it. But I remember seeing some of the stuff for isolating and waiting out of the search study from FSRI, and that seemed to kind of point back and kind of put an exclamation point on some of the stuff that we were asking as well. The closed door stuff, was the victim behind a closed door, I remember was something that has changed some of our search tactics within our department. If we're on engine right now and our job is attack, if I'm on the nozzle and I see an open door, I'm going to yell door right to the person behind me. As they come up, they'll shut that door very quickly. And now that's the next, potentially, if every other door is shut, that's the next area where we're going to target when we search. We tried to define a lot of things as well. It's crazy that, and I don't think we have a perfect definition for a rescue, but we defined rescue because we realized that definition wasn't really consistent across the fire service. So we took a stab at defining rescue. We took a stab at defining save and assist and split search and VES. So we took a stab at defining a bunch of these words as well: no vis, low vis, moderate visibility. So that was, I think, something else that we have at least brought to the table, and it's not the definitive definition, but at least we have some type of common language, and if people ask what a rescue is, we can point to this and say, well, that's anytime you remove a victim and they needed a firefighter in PPE, or they needed firefighter equipment to remove that. Okay, that's what a rescue is. So what happens if I knock on someone's door and tell them, hey, your attic's on fire, and they walk out? Well, we're going to call that an evacuation or an assist. So not quite the same thing, different buckets for us. So just defining terms was something that we wrestled with quite a bit at the beginning as well. We were all very close to each other, but they took some massagings to kind of get where we're at currently.
Yeah, our trade is horrible with jargon and language, for sure. I mean, Aaron Fields, talks about that all the time, right? And like, you could go 3 towns over and everything they say is completely different. And defining those terms is a great place to start for everything, even in your own organization. I serve on our tactical committee, and we're in the process of really trying to actually put things together where it's written down specifically some of these some of these task level skills, and you realize how far off everyone is in the way that they speak and the way that they communicate through like things. And in the moment, like, you don't need what like, it doesn't do any good. Like, So that's obviously that's a great component of it, is defining those things. So we're all speaking the same language. So you can eliminate that whole thing and really get down to what's important. Um, Two things. Bradley Villancourt, he says thank you for your work with FRS and helping us master the craft. So obviously props. That's
Yeah,
a
excited to
big
get to
thing.
work with you here soon, Bradley.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you got one of your guys in here. That's even cooler. Bob Kleinheitz, used to work with him a little bit, and Bob, yeah, it is really great to see data driven people kind of speaking out more on this kind of stuff, and I would imagine as what Nick and company are doing grows even more and gets into more places, you're going to see it in policies. You're going to see some of these chiefs kind of get on board with that stuff, which also plays into seamless transition here. I'm getting pretty good at this with Chief Leanhart here. That data, something that chiefs use. That's the language that they speak. They need the data. They need that kind of stuff. Absolutely true, right? As a firefighter, if you present facts and data, I would imagine most chiefs are going to just be like, all right, roll with it, versus this is dumb, we should do this. You got to have some substance behind it. So
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope that we're more data driven and rationale driven than emotional driven. Not that, I mean, we're humans, we're emotional creatures for sure. But if we have data, we do such a good job of this in the majority of our career when we talk about medicine, right?
yeah,
And I think it's just the fire service kind of catching up, and hopefully we start having better data fields. I'm really excited. I don't know if you've seen this, but the firefighter Mayday survey that is coming out here before too long.
yeah.
So Baz and all his crew are doing a really good job with that. So I'm excited to see. They're kind of taking the mantle from Don Abbott and Project Mayday. So I'm excited to see what they can what kind of fruit that bears.
Yeah, it's awesome to see, and what a great dude and group to pick that up, because what
100%.
what Don was doing was obviously, pioneering. I would say a lot of our data driven information, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of these things would exist in the same way. Maybe even your, FRS would exist without what he was doing, really with his
He was a lot
own
of our
money,
inspiration.
right? Like, I don't think people realize, like, he was fronting that bill up until his death. Like, it was a passion project for him, to say the least, and it's awesome to see that it's in great hands with those guys. And do you? I mean, obviously they share a name to a certain extent with Something Survey.
Yeah.
Are you guys kind of connected with that? Are you kind of helping them see through the challenges of starting that?
Yeah, they reached out. I can't speak to everything, but I know that Brush was the first one that I believe had kind of been in touch with Baz, and then brought us into a group conversation, and they wanted to kind of more or less combine Project Mayday, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Baz, and if I am, just correct me, but from my recollections, they were trying to more or less combine Project Mayday and Firefighter Rescue Survey, and so they reached out and asked us if their questions looked decent and what we could and would and should change. And so this we've been helping them out a little tiny bit, but they brought the ball
Yeah.
99 yards down the field. We just I threw a block to hopefully get them across the goal line.
Well, it sounds like a smart move, honestly, to kind of mirror a little bit of what FRS has been doing, and you might as well keep it consistent. That way, everyone kind of just understands that flow already. So, dude, I'm super excited. I saw they only really, what did he post that today, or maybe it was yesterday?
I think yesterday, yeah.
And very excited to see that kind of kicking back up, because I remember when I was, it was Project Mayday was going to like shut the website down, and I remember like trying to download everything really fast, because I was like, if this goes away, like who knows what's going to happen. And it's pretty awesome that especially those guys. So really excited to see
and
what
Don
happens.
was a huge inspiration for Firefighter Rescue Survey as well. We had reached out to him very early on for advice and his thoughts on this project, and he helped us out early on, and he's was a great guy, and was fortunate enough to work with him a little bit on a different project for a brief amount of time as well. So absolute killer and an inspiration to us as well.
Yeah, he's got to be a pillar for sure. of the modern fire service, to say the least. I mean, Vitali, new firefighters want the why. Firefighter rescue surveys the why. Yeah, you're spot on, dude. Absolutely. It's almost like it played perfectly into that generational shift where everyone wants to know why. Well, here you go. We got it.
Fair point.
So I phrased this question weird because, I sent you the questionnaire ahead of time. But as we've grown and as generations change and all that stuff, I feel like as that happens, there's always a new thing about being new in something. So the question, and if I need to rephrase it, that's fine, let me know. But what's new about being a new officer?
What's new about being a new officer? I haven't thought about this much, but kind of the first thing that pops into my head, I remember growing up in the fire service, and there was all this stuff of going from buddy to boss, and not that that is a bad thing necessarily, but it was always like kind of this delineation, and you were kind of divorced yourself from them. Now you were up here, over here, and they were over there. And my take on this, and maybe it's just because I work with guys that I consider to be really good friends, is I try not to divorce myself from anything. I try, if anything, to be as inclusive as we've always been, if not more so. And I don't know if this is new. I'm sure a million people have said this, but the goal is to try to become, more or less of a family at work as well, where I know their kids' names and I know what they're doing on their days off, and I can call their wife and I have their wife's number, and they wouldn't be afraid to call me if they saw something that was out of the norm or needed to be passed on to somebody else. So I always felt that it was weird. My only really thing to look back on this was not professional. It was always kind of sports. That's kind of the world that I grew up in. And I always appreciated the coach that could, come over and eat a meal with you and BS with you and make jokes, but also, you could call him if you needed anything. And so I don't think it's new necessarily. I'm sure it's been said by brothers and sisters much smarter than me for years and years, but that's one thing that I was, the route that I'm trying to take this, as opposed to maybe what I was steered to initially, and that, like, no, you're the boss now. You can't do that. Don't have fun with your guys and gals. Like, don't do that other stuff. And maybe I'll sing a different tune in the future, but for now, my head is like, no, I'm going to lean into what I've always leaned into and what's been working for me.
Dude, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think the conversation is kind of getting away from the buddy to boss, and it is becoming more of that servant leader type mentality, that family type mentality, right? And I remember when I got promoted, the job before mine, that was a big conversation. They would almost force it upon us, like, hey, you're in charge of them. You're not part of them anymore. And they would come out, and it's not that they were bad about it. The people that outranked me coming to tell me it was good natured. That's how they were brought up in it. That's what they thought was right. And that never connected with me either. I feel like that is becoming a little bit more norm, or at least like the people that are the best of us that are in leadership positions. That's the common theme now. Is exactly what you're talking about.
It's definitely within my organization. I've seen this and I'm mirroring this, right? Like, I know that when I first started here, there was clear lines between certain positions and firefighter. And those lines are definitely a lot more blurry now than they were in the past. And so, I think it's just stuff that I've picked up working with officers and chiefs within my department. I'm like, I like how he does it. I want to be like him when I grow up, if I grow up.
Yeah.
So that's what we're leaning on. And honestly, and I might get some shit for this, but that's kind of what I do as a parent as well. Like, I'm obviously dad. I'm a parent. But I like to think that it's different. It's deeper. I like to think.
Yeah, no, kids. I get what you're saying. My biggest mentor, he told me when I got hired in my current department, is whoever you're going to be at the end is who you should be in the beginning. Like, obviously we grow and change, but he's more talking about, there shouldn't be a shift when you get promoted. There shouldn't be this big light switch that gets flipped and now all of a sudden you're the big boss. He goes, guys will see right through that. He's like, don't be that way. Like, whatever, if you think a joke is inappropriate for a lieutenant, then you shouldn't make it as a firefighter, and vice versa. Like, he's like, you should be that person the whole time. That way, when you do promote, you don't have to change. That's not my words; those are his words. But
yeah,
I think
I can appreciate that. That's wise for sure.
Don't tell him. He doesn't have Facebook, so he can't see these things. So. And I was going to tell another story, but I'll get him in trouble, so I'm definitely not going to do that. So let's just move on to the next thing. So what percentage of an average Wisconsin meal is cheese?
Yeah, we just had pizza tonight. That was probably by volume and by weight, probably at least a third of tonight's meal was cheese.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we definitely like our cheese here.
I don't blame you. I'm
going to say 25% on average.
Come on. I feel like
I think that's fair.
You got to be higher.
I feel like that's pretty accurate. A quarter cheese, that's a lot of cheese, man.
I guess that's true. It's the meal itself. I was almost going to say how many meals involve cheese, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One plate of food.
Yeah, for sure. It's a food group here for sure. It's the base of our food pyramid.
Oh, man. That and the fish fries.
Yeah.
That's great stuff.
I
almost lived in Wisconsin, man. I was so close, but the residency was just a little too far where I am. But my brother's just over.
How close to Wisconsin are you?
Oh, we're talking 10 minutes.
Oh, I didn't realize you were that close. All right.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we're way...
So Bears, Packers, what do you got?
Well, let's... So I was Bears for a very long time. We're off script here for sure. And I love it. So, and I just got sick of the abuse. So, my brother and my family all... Well, my younger brother's an Eagles fan, so he doesn't care. But, yeah, I gave up. So I'm a Packers fan now.
Packers fan, all right.
So I thought to myself, I go, the Bears have basically beaten up my psyche for, 20 years of dealing with all of that crap. And I kind of hate them for it. So I was like, I might as well go to the team where everybody doesn't like the Bears. And I've lived close enough to Wisconsin my whole life. So, and then I came over, last year with Jordan Love. And I was like, all right, I get it. Man, this is fun. Whoa, they're winning? What? And then Caleb Williams showed up, and I was like,
the Bears start winning?
No, I ain't going back. There's no way.
Not going back? Okay.
Nope.
All right.
Nope.
All right.
I'm definitely not going back. I'll throw some shots. It'll be fun to watch Caleb Williams be a bust. That's all I'm going to say. Because
I'm intrigued to see if he kills it or not.
Some of my friends are like all in, like think that he's the greatest that's ever played the game. It's like, he hasn't played a snap yet, right? Like, you got to wait a little bit. I mean,
they felt the same way about Trubisky, and they felt probably the same way about everybody since McMahon.
That's what I'm saying. I lived that life of delusional, like...
Yeah.
There's something to be said, right, about sports.
Jay Cutler's, he's the next coming, man. He's just wait, give it 2 years, he'll be there.
I mean, like, I'm a Cubs fan, so like I know what despair feels like, and I know what just blind loyalty to, getting beat down year after year. I mean, all of that stuff, and I won't leave the Cubs. There's too much magic there for me. But like, yeah, I mean, even the Blackhawks up until 2010, like.
Yeah.
Just I couldn't handle it with the Bears anymore. I just couldn't. I was done.
That's fair. I can empathize. I'm a Vikings fan, so
I'm so there you
familiar.
Go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. At least that's been a little more fun. At least you got a new stadium out of it.
Yeah, we got a beautiful stadium.
That thing's awesome. I mean, last time I went to Soldier Field, I was like, I'm never coming back here again. I was with my wife. It was a work retreat, or not retreat, but like a work thing for her job, and I hadn't been there in years. Like, my great-grandma lived off Lakeshore Drive, so we used to go into the city a lot more. And I hadn't been there since I was probably, 12 or 13. And I'm like, this place sucks. Like, I guess there's something kind of, like, I mean, the pillars and the awesomeness of, like, Soldier Field itself. Like,
yeah.
But once you sit in a seat, you're like, nah, this is awful. I don't want to be here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So I jumped ship. I can't wait to go to Lambeau. I'm excited.
We'll keep you posted on that, babe.
I hope I go this year. The guy I was talking about, my mentor, he's got season tickets, so he's got to hook me up. So as all the information's come out, right, and we're in this era where risk has become a giant conversation topic, and it's almost polarizing, right? It's almost like it's binary between two sides of it. What are some things that a firefighter can do, and then beyond in those levels, to kind of generate conversation around risk, to help educate people towards what risk actually is, right? What we're truly risking when we do things based on, data, essentially.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think, again, kind of circling back to what we talked about earlier, is I think that the first thing we need to do is just kind of define our terms. Sometimes these risk and reward can be so nebulous, and what you have in your mind for what risk is and what I have in my mind for what risk is are two different things. So I think the first thing we need to do is just kind of make sure that we've defined our terms. Kind of like we're having a philosophical or ideological debate. Step one, let's just define our terms so we know we're speaking the same language. And then what's nice about it being 2024 is that we do have more data than we've had in the past. I know that NIFRS, hasn't necessarily changed a bunch of data fields, but we have guys like Bill Carey that are really looking into our line of duty deaths, and really not just kind of looking into them and repeating what the USFA says, but really kind of going in there and be like, hold on, this is classified as advancing a hose line. This person was not in the structure. This was a wildland fire. This was, a car fire, whatever the case may be. But actually, we have better data when it comes to our line of duty deaths. We don't have a ton when it comes to the line of duty injuries. So I'd like more information there, because I think that if we only look at our deaths, that's a little bit myopic.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that coin is looking at our saves as well. But again, we're not capturing all of our saves either. But I did something kind of interesting, at least interesting to me recently, because I kind of got, the fire service has talked about this kind of, what do we call it? We'll call it the Brunacini principle, maybe, where you risk a lot to save a lot.
Yeah.
You risk a little to save a little. You risk nothing to save what's already been lost, right? And I know there's maybe some more nuanced or different versions of that all kind of say the same thing. But those things still, like we talk about this, and this has been posted on most Facebook pages at some point over the past 20 years. But like, what does that mean? What does risking a little mean? Are we talking stakes? Are we talking odds? And some of the guys that I really look up to in this are guys like Ben Schultz. I thought that he's made some really good points about this, about risk in the past when it comes to mountaineering versus kind of the alpine style, the fast and light versus kind of the long, slow slog of mountaineering up a mountain. The analogy that I like to use is surfing. I've never been surfing. I've only been to an ocean a handful of times in my entire life. But if you were to drop me off in Tahiti, where they have these big giant waves, and you said, all right, why don't you go surf that wave? And then the guy next to me is the best surfer that's ever lived, and he goes out there. We're both doing the same thing, but the risk is incredibly different to him, who's got thousands of hours on a surfboard, versus me, who has zero time on a surfboard ever. So it's making sure that we define and control what we can control. So when it comes to risk, the way that I look at this, and we stole this from other industries, but it was consequence times severity. Stand by. Let me look this up, because I want to make sure I don't get this wrong.
Yeah.
I'm kind of some of this. But anyways, one of the things that we did is we started looking at data from USFA, from NFPA, to try to figure out how many lives were lost in the first 90 days of 2021, and then overlay that with the number of lives that were saved in the first 90 days of 2021. And that's data directly from Rush's Fireground Research, Civilian Research Rescue Project. And what we found looking at some of this data is that 1 out of every 63 fires in the U.S., there's somebody trapped. On average, every 63 fires, there's somebody trapped in the U.S. And then if you look at the number of LODDs due to the primary and secondary effects of fire, meaning that somebody was burned or they asphyxiated or they had a collapse, some type of traumatic event inside the fire building. So we will not capture somebody having a heart attack inside a fire building. But it was 1 out of every 80,506 fires. So we're talking 3 orders of magnitude difference between the two of those. And I know this is only looking at kind of a myopic look at two sides of the same coin, but those are maybe the most palpable data sets as well. Lives saved versus lives lost. And really, I think when we're talking about risk and reward, those are kind of the ultimate risk and reward. So crunching some of those numbers, which I think will end up being in a fire engineering article in August, maybe. I'm not quite sure of the timeline. It might be September. And it might even be later. I haven't got anything finalized yet, but that was really something that was kind of mind-blowing for me. And then if you look at some of the firefighter rescue survey numbers, something that I think kind of parallels this discussion is the number of rescues and the survival percentage when there's fire at the victim's location, when the fire is not incipient, it's not a room and contents, it's not multiple rooms on fires, there's actual structural involvement, or when you have over 75% of the building involved in fire when you arrive on scene and realizing, hey, there is still survivable space in here. Let's just change this conversation and control what we can control. I can't control the conditions, but you know what I can control? I can control my training. I control my thought process, my language, our SOPs, our writing assignments. We can control having this ideology and controlling that narrative. And I'm not advocating being stupid or being kind of cowboyish, for maybe lack of a better term. It's this kind of intelligence and putting risk, defining risk, and putting it in the box that it should live in, instead of this big giant nebulous cloud floating around everything that we can't even really define, let alone have a management plan for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not completely equitable, but like they shot people to the moon. You want to talk about risk, like instant death, if one thing went wrong. But they were intelligent enough to do their research and actually have, the information and a plan built out that made sense. And yeah, obviously we know that people have died, with that mission of going to the moon or whatever. But like, they did it, they made it, right? So, what's risk?
Well said, right there. I think that's a pretty good analogy right there. And I did pull this up to make sure I wasn't getting this wrong, but the standard kind of risk equations taken from other industries is that risk equals probability times consequence. So if you want to look at something very specific like deaths, you look at the probability of deaths, and the best way to look at that is kind of the historical trends for that. Not that what happened in the past will happen in the future, but that's the best data set that we have to go off of at this point in time, without knowing 800 individual data points about every specific fire.
Yeah,
it's just look at this big, broad, 30,000-foot view of the fire service.
Yeah. Smaller scale. There's been a debate on, totally shifting here, but like on halyards. Do you tie a halyard? Do you not tie a halyard? What's the risk of not tying a halyard? And there was an awesome, and I'm drawing a blank on who wrote it, but there was a really cool fire engineering article that was kind of about this. And this conversation's existed forever, where people are like, don't tie it. Well, it doesn't take that long to tie it. Well, you should tie it. And somewhere along the line, someone went, well, when have the dogs randomly undone themselves? The only thing that's going to make them undo themselves is a victim out the window pulling on your ladder. And so it's like, if you know those things and you're intelligent about it, maybe you don't tie it for this specific instance, but maybe this one you would. And so it's more about like knowing the end result and what could happen. And that's how you manage risk, I guess, in a more trucky way of phrasing those things, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of like if this then that.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if there's fire blowing out of that window, well, like maybe I'm not making entrance into that window.
Yeah.
Maybe that's when I flow water through that window. If if there's a closed door between me and the victim, or if I can put a closed door between me and the victim, like it's a lot of kind of if and thens. So if this, then that.
Yeah.
Instead of these big broad brush strokes, and I think that just leads to some of this kind of dogma.
Yeah.
In the fire service that is awful prevalent. I think we can all probably rattle off 10 instances where, like, I don't know if you had this, what Fire 1 looked like in Wisconsin, or excuse me, in Illinois, but where I came from in Colorado, it was like if you stop touching your partner's boot when you're doing your Fire 1 search, like, boom, you're automatically going to die. You'd have no idea where you're at anymore. You're going to die. You might have just killed your partner as well. And we're like, well, hold on, slow down.
Yeah.
Why? Tell me why this is the case. It reminds me of some of our messaging for public education, kind of this stop, drop, and roll stuff. Like, hey, if your kids catch on fire, if your clothes catch on fire, kids, and you see all these kids' eyes get huge, you're like, wait, my clothes are going to catch on fire? And you're like, well, hold on. Maybe we need to have better messaging right here. How do I steer this and teach them what I need to teach them where it's usable for them? And they can recall this if need be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're making strides. I mean, you'll hear plenty of people talk about change textbooks, so it's more based on those things, and I'm sure someday we will get there. But yeah, my basic fire training was the same way, and again, like, it's not that the instructors were dumb or bad. It's not that. Yeah. It's far from it. It's just there was a lack of standards and information to base those standards off of. So what do you put out there that's a blanket, unkillable, essentially bulletproof way to search a room? Well, it's to stay anchored to a safety of some sort the entire time. But that's not, we all know that's when you get in a room with furniture and all these other things, like, that's not feasible. And the room's way smaller theoretically once you put furniture where you don't even need that. And it's cool to see that shift is happening, backed up with data, backed up with some real things, and we're getting away from that. And it's not shitting on the book, and it's not shitting on the instructors that taught it. It's just understanding the why a little bit better.
That's a good point of clarification there. That it's not the instructors that were idiots or ill-informed. They just didn't have the right information, and they were doing what they thought was the best.
Yeah.
When it goes back to that search thing, analogy that I sometimes use is, and I use the same thing with two people trying to throw a smaller ladder. It's like two people trying to tie your shoes at the same time. Like, you're both trying to, like, just get out of here. I got this. Whereas, it should be twice as fast with two people tying your shoes. No, it's like twice as slow, and it's not going to be as good. And not only is it twice as slow, but if you did something else, we could knock off two things instead of just one thing.
Yeah.
In half the time.
Yeah, and there's so much garbage. Like, I remember being taught, call out what you see and all that other stuff, which all sounds great when you're doing the drills with no mask on and all that other stuff. And so I remember going to fires early in my career where that was the default, right? It was hands and knees, find a wall, grab a boot, go. And it's just people yelling the whole time. The entire time you're doing a search of dresser, door, window, bed. Like, everyone's just constantly yelling, and it does literally nothing for anyone other than just make it more stressful, and then you cover up real, actual information that should be important. Like, I know that's a total tangent, but yeah, as we've grown, we've seen that those things don't make sense, and now we can actually, like, the city, they've been probably doing that forever. Like, these larger departments, they've taken those classes and they went, all right, cool, we're just gonna actually do what we really do, and it didn't really trickle out into the suburban fire departments in that same regard, right? And one of the things I was just teaching at firemanship, actually, and one of the guys is a Chicago fireman, and he's 20-something years on the job. This rough, tough dude, and awesome guy. And he goes, at some point in your career, you're going to be a hypocrite. And sitting and listening to him talk to the people coming through. He goes, I never wore my waist strap, and I took they do a RIC class that's awesome, and he took that, and he's like, I will never go to a fire without my waist strap on again because I see the value in it. And he's like, I went back to my department and everybody, not everybody, but people were like jamming at him like, well, you never wore it before, you never told us to before. And so he tells a story. At some point you're going to be a hypocrite. I can sit here and tell you, when I taught fire academies, I taught people to go on a wall because that's all I knew.
Yeah.
And now it's changed. And if that makes me a hypocrite, then that is what it is, right? And we have to get over that, and we have to be able to just shove that down and move on to the next thing and teach people the right stuff. So, and thanks to what you guys are doing.
I think being a hypocrite oftentimes and flip-flopping oftentimes are really good things. It shows that you're open-minded. It shows that you're thinking critically, hopefully at least, and that you're trending in the right direction. And I think too often, if we're just kind of bogged down in the way we've always done it, you're never going to grow, man. And you're not going to get any better if you're always just doing the same thing over and over. So I like that, and I hope I become a hypocrite quite a bit in the future.
Yeah.
And what I thought I knew in the past, I know better in the future, and I don't make the same mistakes twice.
Well, staying on that theme, what was one set of one conclusion from the data, like early on, even now, that really made you change everything to a certain extent on what you were doing? That just totally, it was like seeing something for the first time. You're like, wow, I've been doing this wrong.
Yeah, I think there's maybe two kind of data sets, and the vast majority of these kind of just reinforced what I thought I had known or what I had been taught, or what had been preached to the majority of the fire service. And I like that. I like that we were probably always doing it the correct way from the get-go. And I think that you could look at a lot of the UL data or the FSRI data and say a lot of the same things. Like, well, yeah, we knew that if you would have opened doors and windows and not put water on the fire is going to grow. We knew that. We might not have known it like we should have, but we were aware of that. So I think the vast majority of the data sets, not too surprising to me, and I kind of already alluded to these. I call these kind of the conditions trilogy. These are conditions upon arrival, upon entry, and then at the victim's location. The survivability percentages in all three of those, when the conditions are at their worst, all these conditions are on some type of spectrum, from incipient to structural fire, from nothing showing all the way up to over 75% involvement from the exterior, and then from no smoke or fire at the victim's location all the way up to fire at the victim's location. Some of these are antithetical or the exact opposite of what I was taught, especially like if there's fire in that room, like the victim is dead, assuming that just because there's fire in there, it must be a post-flashover room, which isn't the case. But even if it were, maybe it only just takes a closed door. They're in the closet of that bedroom, and now they're still survivable. Maybe they're in there, but they're protected. They have enough cover or shielding where they're in a decent spot, or maybe they're in the inlet portion of the flow path as opposed to the exhaust. So the the coordination, the conditions trilogy are the ones that were the most surprising to me. The other ones that I thought were a little bit surprising is how we were finding these victims. These numbers aren't going to be accurate, but I think 80% of the time we're finding them with our eyes, with no thermal imaging camera, or with our hands. I think it's 52% eyes, 28% hands, and then 13% of the victims were hearing. Of that, 7% of the time they're calling out back to us. So when we call, they answer. And then a thermal imaging camera, we're only finding 7% of our victims with the thermal imaging camera. Now, we did not ask this question in this way from the get-go. So these numbers there might be a little bit more variance in these numbers because the sample size is lower for these, I think, on the order of about 1,000 as opposed to 2,000 or 3,000. So that number will likely fluctuate, but I would have thought that we would have found more victims with a thermal imaging camera. That would have been kind of what I was led to believe and taught to believe. And not that thermal imaging camera is a bad tool. I don't think that speaks to the efficacy of the actual tool itself. I think it speaks to probably a training problem on our end or a knowledge problem on our end, because it is a great tool.
Yeah. Yeah, that I will
So
tell
are our
you.
eyes, so are our hands, so are our ears too. So
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that data set up because that changed me. That changed the way that I thought about using the tick, right? Like, it's not that I was one of those people that treated it like a heads up display necessarily, but I found myself really searching with the tick as opposed to now where I think of it more about like fire conditions and layout more so than trying to look for just one tiny little thing of a person, you know, versus seeing the information that came out there that it's using your eyes and it's using your hands more so than the tick. Not that the tick, like you said, is invaluable. It's just what you're using it for. And then you back that stuff up with like what Andy Starnes is doing and teaching.
yeah,
Like it just all that stuff starts to come together again. And yeah, that was one that really surprised me. I would have thought that people would have just been like, burp. I mean, I was teaching. I remember again, hypocrite. We would put hot packs all over the dummies and throw them in the tower. And well, bodies are warm, aren't they? And then you like really, when you think about it, they're not. They might be darker than everything else around because of, or it depends on how your tick's set up. But
yeah.
that
No, that's a really good point. And Dustin Martinez does a really good job and has videos from Cobb County where they're making rescues, and you can actually see the victims on their thermal imaging cameras. And he's got upwards of a dozen at this point in time, and he's willing to share these with anybody. So everybody go bug Dustin. But what they found was to stop looking for color. All the videos that I've seen from him are all grayscale. So if it's hotter, it's whiter. If it's colder, it's darker. But there's times where the victim is darker, times where the victim is lighter, and times where the victim is kind of monochromatic or the same color, depending on how long they've been in there, where the fire's at, if water has been applied. So they teach not to look for color, but to look for contour. So you look for the shape of a butt, of an elbow, of a hand, of a head, of a foot, stuff like that, which I thought was pretty wise too, and makes sense when you start thinking about it. But they do. There'll be times, to your point, where they will heat up victims. There'll be times where they'll cool victims down. There'll be times where they want to make sure that they'll dunk them in water so that when they flow water in there, the same temperature as the rest of the room as well. So
yeah, it's tough
I
to
appreciate
recreate
that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's, we don't see a bunch of videos of victims on thermal imaging cameras.
yeah.
Of people actually finding victims with thermal imaging cameras. So the best cache that I know is Dirty Dustin's videos.
Well, it's cool. Yeah, check that out for sure. Anything that gives you some insight onto what you're actually using the thing for, it's invaluable at a certain point. Whether it's data, whether it's somebody else's video, whether it's your own experience. But yeah, just trying to either not create a training scar or maximize use of the tools that you have. So as a captain, what's your role in shift training?
So our department is 6 stations. Um, we have how our department operates is each officer has some type of training specialty, and oftentimes they have kind of these subspecialties where they're maybe not the uh, quote unquote subject matter expert in this domain, but maybe they're one of the helpers or the second string kind of teachers. So for me, on my shift right now, my role is typically to take care of training for my crew, but we also do what we call academy days. And so twice a year, we will lead some type of fire-based training, whether that's throwing ladders, whether that's running through evolutions, or having live burns, or focusing on forcible entry, or whatever. We call it facilities training. It falls under that bucket for ISO. But I will have been kind of tasked with I'm the suppression captain, um, doing that with all the crews a couple times a year. So I'm fortunate enough where I get to go out sometimes up to 4 times a year with each station, and get a flow water, force doors, sling aluminum, um, whatever we want to do that day. Typically, twice a year it's guided, where we'll come up with a lesson plan and we'll focus really hard on a certain area, whether that's kind of coordination or search or advancing a hose line or whatever we want to focus on. And the other 2 times it'll be kind of what we call non-guided or unguided, where that's the officer asking his crew and keeping an eye on his crew or her crew, and realizing like, hey, we really need to work on vertical ventilation or flat roof ops or whatever. So then we'll come in, we'll talk, and I'll help kind of facilitate some of that training. I won't always be the lead, but I'll kind of help out and make sure they have what they need for that training as well. So I get a chance to work to train with my shift, my crew and my station most days, and then God, we have 6 stations, 4 times a year, so another 24-ish times. Sometimes there's multiple companies working at once, so it might not always be 24 times, but we get to go out there and actually do fire ground skills as well. And when it comes to training, that's really the only stuff that I'm responsible for at this point in time for my shift or my department.
Is it kind of loose too, like where, I mean, what's the kind of culture around it? Is training, is there a lot of self-motivated stuff?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it depends on the shift and it depends on the crew. Our battalion chief is a big proponent and has been living this life since I've ever met him, but a big proponent of training. So we call this academy days. Those each crew gets what is that, 16 hours of facilities training a year. Yeah. So we do kind of prompt people going, hey, you got a full crew today. You guys want to go knock this out today? It's a beautiful day. Looks like Friday or Saturday is going to be a lot hotter, colder, rainier, whatever. So we'll try to prompt a little bit, but we don't have to prompt very hard on our shift, to be honest. 5s trains a lot, 8s trains, 2s trains. So it's 10s trains. We don't have too much of an issue getting these other crews to come training, and 9s and 6s, they like training too. I didn't say those two, but everyone likes training for the most part.
Good.
It's one of those things, and I don't think we're alone here, where sometimes getting to the training ground is a bit of a chore, but once we're there, we have a good time.
Yeah, I think that's...
People might bitch about having to go there, but once you're there, we're all having a good time.
Yeah. What would you say would be like the most important element of shift training?
Kind of if we had to put like our ethos and prioritize our ethos, it would probably be realism. Knowing that there's a lot that we can't recreate and that we can't capture, so we try to work around some of those things. But I guess what I'm trying to say with that is they don't need to be these big, giant, complex things. They might be these really kind of siloed things that we're focused on. But if we're focused on throwing ladders, let's make sure that we're actually grabbing it from the rig, and we actually are grabbing our tool complement with this, and we don't have everything kind of set up and just focusing on one thing. That we'll go through kind of the entirety of what we want to. So realism as much as we can. And then we don't have these like super convoluted drills necessarily either. Sometimes they're just these 10, 15-minute things that we want to work on, because that's pretty palatable for people as well, especially when we try to introduce some of this stuff. If we're kind of changing the inertia, just slow and steady, 10 pounds of pressure is kind of what we're going for 100% of the time, as opposed to like, all right, shit's going to change around here. Every day we're training for 14 hours. Because we're not going to get the buy-in. So it's kind of this slow and steady, and we're going to boil that frog without him even knowing. It's kind of some of our thought process here.
Is that a Wisconsin phrase, by the way? Boil the frog?
Boil the frog? Have you heard that before?
No, that was...
Oh, yeah. That's I don't even know where that came from. It's relatively famous. But you just slowly turn up the heat on the frog. He's in a hot tub. He's having a good time, and before he knows it, he's no longer with him. You got boiled frog.
That's the opposite of dropping the lobster in, right? Where they
exactly. Just a little bit at a time.
That's why those things
Right?
scream.
It's like when you see your kid every day, and he's growing, but you don't really realize it. And then grandma or grandpa comes in, and they haven't seen him in 6 months. They're like, geez, you grew him 6 inches. And you're like, oh, I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
Or like as your hair slowly starts fading away.
Yeah.
You don't really realize it because every day it just looks a tiny little bit different.
Yeah, I thought
but if you haven't seen somebody since high school, they're like, oh shit, you went bald, dude.
I thought that was going to be it for me with a mustache. Was one day it would just exist and it would look good, and that did not happen. If you really wanted to, you can look back at some old videos of this already, and it was not good. I tried.
You got some good looking follicles there now.
I got it up on the top. That's where I got it. I don't. Hey, there's nothing down here.
I don't know. That lip looks like it has some follicles on it.
No. Trust me. It looks like eyebrows on my lip. Like I don't get any.
A bald patch in the middle.
Nothing in the middle. It looks
like
terrible.
An anti-Hitler.
Yep, an anti-Hitler. So
okay.
What was it? Somebody pointed out that it looked like Post Malone's mustache, where it looks like two capybaras kissing, and I was like, nope. My wife was making fun of me the whole time. She hated it.
They're just jealous.
No, so my two shift mates, just great mustaches. It upsets me all the time. We're to the point where I think I'm gonna go get a fake one and glue it on one shift just so I could fit in with the group. But yeah, I gave it a shot. That ship sailed. I can grow a mean neck beard. All right, if that comes into style, like all this, I'm good.
Nice.
No mustache. I gave it a shot.
I give it every 2 years. Try it again, man. You never know.
So that's my dad said he couldn't grow facial hair really well until he was like 40, and then all of a sudden, like it just magically he was growing goatees and stuff. I don't know. We'll revisit it.
Yeah, every 2 years, give it a whirl again. You got nothing to lose.
That's true.
You're locked in.
I guess my wife's not going anywhere, so
he's pot committed at this point.
It's just my own embarrassment at that point, but it wasn't pretty. It was
lean into it.
Well, like, hey, if it was like the 1920s or something like that, that was in style where there was the gap, but it was like the thin one. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna look like a weirdo. Like,
I've been debating a pencil thin mustache.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know if I can pull it off. It's not quite dark enough. But if I had like black hair, pencil thin might be the way.
I feel like you gotta have dark hair to do that. Otherwise,
a
like
little Michael Jordan-esque almost.
Yeah. Nope.
Bring it back, man.
There's no way I'm setting that trend. There's no fucking way.
Give it 2 years. Try it.
I will. Never mind. I was gonna pull up. I don't know if I can find it again, but there was There was one. I'll side story you. But I was doing an episode. I just spent last year building my deck out back, and like most house projects, I got hurt at some point. Basically, like Tim Allen. And I was using a post hole digger, and I threw it in a hole, and it hit a rock, and it bounced, and I literally punched myself in the face. So I had a huge black eye, this gnarly-looking, terrible mustache, and I got up on the camera to do an episode, and I, like, the whole time, like, I have Zoom on my screen so I can see myself, and I just kept looking at myself the whole time, like, I can't do I look like such a weirdo. I should have worn a mask or something. But no, I think the mustache ship sailed for now.
All right, there's a really good song by Jimmy Buffett called "Pencil Thin Mustache."
Yeah.
Listen to that one of these times. Maybe it'll change your mind. It's a good song, man.
Oh my god. I never close the door. I'll say that.
There you go.
But
I like that. There you go. Don't rule it out quite yet.
It's pretty close, but
I keep telling my wife, don't rule it out without trying it. Just try it at least.
I should have done it before I met my wife. I should have done it when I was paid on call. I should have just done it then. Nobody cared what I looked like then. I was just some kid. Right. They would have been like, "Oh, I think I had him."
Your wife's pot committed, man. She's not going anywhere. You can do what you want now.
I feel like she would shave it off in the middle of the night. I thought she was close a couple times. She was just like, "This thing's terrible." Well, shoot, unless I can think of something else. So that was kind of the meat of like those the main questions we kind of had. But I'll roll into the closing questions. We got a couple of stragglers still watching live. So if you got a question for Nick, throw it in there, and I will ask it to him. And if I think of anything, I'll throw it your way too. But we'll kind of go into these closing ones.
I hope I'm making him dizzy with all my moving over
with
here.
Oh, dude, welcome to
the
ADHD club over here.
Sorry, viewers.
Oh my God. You should see my feet are tapping the whole time underneath the desk here. Where am I at? Jeez, I'm terrible tonight. All right.
I'm good, baby.
What's the best training class that you ever participated in? Training or class? I apologize.
Best training or class that I've ever been in. God, I'm sure everyone is saying a lot of the same classes. I mean, it's hard not to put nozzle forward up there. Um, I'm gonna say one that probably hasn't been said yet, but there was a guy named Art Arnelich. He used to work in Barcelona, and now he works for CERN over in Switzerland, and he had a class called the Three T's. It was tactics, technique, and time, and I don't. I became friends with him, and he kind of gave me his class one day. And it's the first time that I had seen anybody make some of these connections to these laws of physics. So this is more kind of science being brought into to firefighting, and these laws of physics, the conservation of mass, the conservation of energy, um, Thornton's rule. I forget exactly everything else that he had brought in there. Potentially the latent heat of vaporization. So these dumb kind of these scientific things that we were somewhat familiar with, but probably didn't have, or at least I didn't have a real good grasp on. He just did a really good job of kind of bringing it down to the level where my dumbass could understand it. And then, so when I started seeing some of this stuff as laws of physics, I started having kind of a different view of the fire ground and fire behavior or fire dynamics and how we could operate going, well, these are always going to be, these things will never change in any fire, these couple things. So if you understand this, you understand that the smoke that leaves has to equal in weight the air that comes in, if this was a closed system, but we'll assume that it's closed. Um, and that if most of this thing is pushing out smoke from, the top of the door all the way to almost the bottom of the door, and it's pumping out smoke, this thing's got to be sucking in just a ton of air at the bottom right there. um, Thornton's rule that the amount of fire, the heat release rate is directly proportional to the air that the fire consumes. Like, I'd never seen these things before, and I've always had some of the scientific bent or a lens to how I see a lot of things. And for me, that was super helpful and eye opening. And that was one of these things that kind of changed how we looked at the fire service. And again, it's hard not to. I'm sure everyone is saying this, so that's why I wanted to go a different way. But Nozzle Forward is an amazing paradigm shifting class. The first Irons and Ladders class that I went to absolutely changed my trajectory and outlook on the fire service, and even the outlook that I had on myself. So a ton of classes, but those three kind of pop into my head first for now.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, I wasn't expecting someone from Barcelona or Switzerland, right? That's
Yeah.
awesome. Kind of in that thought process, what was something like early when you went to Fire One? What was a concept that you just did not grasp right away that took you some time on your own research to really totally understand?
Ventilation. I thought that the textbook itself and our instructors as well, and again, not their fault. They did not have the right tools, but it was, God, what was it? It's a three. I think I used when I went through. It was the red and orangey yellow soft cover. I don't know if that's three or four. Anywho,
I know what you mean.
uh,
Yeah.
but when they talk about ventilation, it was like ventilation can lead to, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I'm sure I'm getting this wrong, but it's in the same vein. Ventilation could lead to lifting and leaning and making conditions better and enhance survival, like semicolon. But when done, not when not coordinated, can lead to worsening fire conditions, flashover, smoke explosions, and backdrafts. And I was like, well, that semicolon's doing a lot of fucking heavy lifting here, and they didn't tell me what coordination really meant. I knew that if I ever saw coordinated as one of the answers for the multiple choice test, I circled that one, and I could regurgitate that phrase and tell people, well, it's got to be coordinated. It's going to lead to lifting and leaning. But if it's not coordinated, it's going to lead to worse conditions and potentially, rapid fire progression, and more death. And so I could recite that, but I didn't know what it meant. There was no like, you know, what was that phrase that Elkhart always talks about, starving for
Oh, what is it? Drowning in knowledge and
Drowning,
starving for wisdom.
starving for wisdom. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of how I felt about that. So that for sure was one of them. The other thing that I remember that I was taught, and it made sense to me, but then looking back on it, makes no sense at all, was like the importance of touching a wall. And it went so far when I was going through Fire One, whereas like let's say you're searching a room that has a bookshelf, like you take that bookshelf and you dump it and you make sure you don't lose contact with that wall. Like don't just touch the bookshelf and go touch the wall on the other side. It was like dump the bookshelf, crawl over the bookshelf, like dump the bookshelf potentially onto somebody, crawl over that person on top of a bookshelf, and then keep searching. Um, and honestly, how it was sold to me and how little I understood at the time, and the confidence that the instructor said this with, it did make sense to me. Um, and then I don't know how long down the road at some point it was like, oh wait, that doesn't make any more. It doesn't make sense to me anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what pieces of information changed that, but at some point it no longer made sense to me. Same thing with VES being a one-room search.
Yeah.
I remember exactly where I was talking to Olson and McWilliams about no. Here's how we do this. Once we're done searching that bedroom, if conditions allow, we'll just go keep searching on, let's say, Division Two. And like it literally, I could hear my brain like fighting this for a minute, going, "Wait, hold on, guys, that's not what VES is." And they're like, "Well, why?" And I'm like, "Well, huh, I don't have a good answer for you." And noodling that for a while and talked to some other people, and then that was a good, again, another kind of paradigm shift for me. But VES made sense to me to have one be a one room search until I talked to people that used rationality
Yeah.
and logic, and got rid of that dogma.
I struggled with all of those things. I'm in the same boat. Like, I thought I would be doing a lot more searching a room with a pike pole on a wall with my legs out in the middle of the room. Like, that's what, those things were sold to me as like normal. And, and ventilation was really tough. I feel like I didn't get enough fire behavior knowledge, like true fire science knowledge.
Agreed.
And once you really actually put those together, like I remember thinking earlier, like if I break all the windows out, all the smoke's going to lift and we're going to be just fine. Well, no, that comes with something else. Like you have to put water on the fire if you want any sort of lift. And yeah, those have been concepts that really early were really confusing to me. So that's funny that we share pretty much all of those. Yeah. What's one mistake that you made in your career and you learned from?
I would say probably the biggest mistake that I made a lot of times. How do I phrase this? I was very vocal about and very emotional with my thoughts, and if I thought somebody else was doing something wrong, I let them know. So like I've kind of had two careers at the two departments that I've worked for. The first one I was loud and proud and brash and pretty ego driven, and I still am all those things at times. But I think a little bit the temperature's been turned down quite a bit. I was in my chief's office on a pretty regular basis at my first department for pissing people off and not kind of playing the long game, kind of playing the short game. Like, we need to change this now, today, and not realizing, like, hey, if you play this a little bit more strategically and use your social capital or political capital, you can make bigger changes down the road, and you're not trying to die on every single hill that you see. So it was fighting too many battles and fighting too many battles poorly. Um, I'm pretty particular about the battles that I fight now. And I try to be somewhat strategic about how I fight these as well. Sometimes I have shadow people trying to do stuff for me because they have more political influence and people will listen to them that have a seat at the table. So that sounds nefarious when you say it like that. I just thought it sounded kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to be strategic and try to play the long game and not dying on so many hills. I have lots of body parts strewn about all these hills in Colorado,
Ha, man, I got
all over the Front Range.
yeah. I see your record, so I think you'll get this reference. But my theme song would have been Billy Joel's "Angry Young Man" for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
I listen to those lyrics and I'm like, oh my god.
Love me some Billy Joel. Underrated.
Yeah, for sure.
We only play doo-wop Billy Joel.
Yeah,
Only play 80s Joel.
strictly 80s Joel.
Doo-wop Joel sucks.
Play something from Stranger. Oh man. Did you ever lose your passion for the fire service? And if you did, what'd you do to get it back, and what keeps you into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this constant kind of ebb and flow at times. I don't really know. I think probably the thing that has kept me more engaged than not engaged more often than not is just been going to conferences, talking to people. The why is pretty solid for me. Like, I think what we're doing is important. Um, and I think what we're doing is at least potentially noble. What we might be called to do tomorrow, maybe not what we do many days, because there's plenty of days where I don't make a giant difference in the world. But I don't know. I think the why is there. So there's definitely a bunch of ebbing and flowing. Kind of the same thing with my fitness, with my diet, with my reading, all the other things that I think are important. For the most part, there's this relatively stable path that I'm on. But yeah, there's times where I meander off that path and don't pick up a book for a while, or not picking up trade magazines for a while. And I think sometimes that's healthy as well. To just take a step back for weeks, months, whatever it may be. But I do try to make sure that when I'm at work, I'm fully at work.
Yeah.
But sometimes when I'm at home, I'm fully at home too.
Yeah. Uh, this I've been trying to think of how to maybe phrase this, and sometimes I feel like this question comes off clunky. So if it doesn't make sense, just ask me. But if you wanted to give someone else a sense of how fire service culture should work by meeting one person and spending time with them, who would that be? And they can be alive or dead. It doesn't matter. Just you know, random person from the public that knows nothing about us, a new guy that knows nothing about the fire service, something like that. You put them with one guy, or I shouldn't say guy, but you know what I mean. One person.
Yeah. Um. The first name that popped into my head was Corley Moore. Just his passion, his drive, like it's palpable. If you've ever been in a room with him, you know that this is 100% authentic coming from him, and it's not some act or some mask that he's wearing. So that's the first name that popped into my head, and there's plenty of other people that I'm sure I could name. I'm trying to look back at where I draw a lot of inspiration in my life from is just other books.
Yeah.
Something that now I'm thinking about this and the title of your show. Where did the title of your show come from? Where did Outliers come from?
So two components. The Talkin shop, that was because every time I would go to a function or something with firefighters, I would always inevitably talk to them endlessly, and it would drive my wife bonkers. And she would go, "Are you just over there talking shop again?" And that's been a joke forever, so that's where that came from. And then Outliers actually came from my lieutenant, my mentor, who I was trying to come up with a way to give my passion, right? And I felt suppressed where I work. And it's not quite that bad anymore. I have better outlets to do things. But at that time, I was very, very on an island, and I felt very suppressed. And he would always encourage me to get outside of where I was. And he just one day, he was like, hey, you're kind of an outlier here, dude. And that's where the name ended up coming from. I think I was doing something. I know the book, Malcolm Gladwell, right?
Yeah.
I did end up reading that, and it's not obviously, it's a great book. It's not I'm not an outlier by data. You know what I mean? I don't think there's a quantifiable, I lived in this region of France and that's why I'm here. Phenomenal book. Definitely not knocking it, but I started with another one. So I'm a second gen, and I'm going to go way deep because we're at the end, and not everybody listens to the ends of these anyway. But I'm a big Star Wars guy, and there was a character called Revan, and the Revenant is what that name is based off of, and he was the returning. He was returning to greatness. He was a Jedi. He left. He became evil. He came back, and I felt like we were in a position of like the fire service coming back to what we were, and being a second gen, I felt connected to that like sense of being the Revenant. But the name didn't stick, and it didn't work, and I didn't like it. And then one day, my lieutenant goes, "Yeah, you're kind of an outlier here, dude." I was like, "Well, there's that."
I was assuming the answer for the outliers portion of the name was going to come from the book, which is a great book.
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell has I think 3 books that are just fantastic, and they're all kind of focusing on what makes great, what begets greatness. And Outliers, I thought was a really good book. So that's another thing. Like, it's not a person.
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell is not who I would say, but anyone that he talks to in his book Outliers, I think would be nice too. And I think that greatness, or people who strive for greatness is maybe a better way to put this in any domain. There's very similar traits with the best of the fire service as well. So anyone in any domain who is the tip of the spear, I think you could probably look at them like Olympians. There's a lot of really good stuff that I would love to have about in my psyche, in my character that Olympians possess, right? Whether that's Simone or Noah or whoever. So yeah, Corley's the first one that pops into my head. But I think anyone who's great at what they do and loves what they do, probably pretty similar.
Yeah, it's a great answer, and he's awesome for sure. Very like you said, he's authentic, and much like this, the people that he gets to talk to like only further expands that. You know what I mean, or validates the way that he is. So yeah, awesome. Obviously, awesome answer. Last one. It's a hard one. And I think I always make that joke. I need a new one. But what's the best part of the job?
Part of the job. I'm sure everyone's saying a handful of things. I mean, the people, the brotherhood, the fact that we serve something bigger than ourselves, I think are all great. No.
You could say the same things. It's not.
Well, and all those things matter, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of, for me, like, what is the best part of the job? Why do I love this job? And I'm sure there's some of it's wrapped up in all of those things. I don't know. I think that having a purpose is super valuable to me as a person, as a father, as a employee. So maybe for me it's finding purpose.
That's awesome. That is different. You're an outlier. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's an awesome component of the job for sure. Well, with that, I mean.
Plus, I love my brothers and my sisters, and
of course,
I like, there's a ton of stuff about the job that's pretty awesome. But yeah, I think for me, probably the biggest thing, I think is it provides a purpose.
That's great. Yeah, great words. That's gonna make it for us. That's
perfect, man.
That's it. Hang out for a sec, and we'll post green room. But that's gonna be it for us. Thanks for listening and watching, whatever you're doing, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks again, Nick, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thanks, listeners.